In fact, you know what's the irony? When I was in Mysore, there used to be this pint called a UB pint. It's still available, and in those days, it
still
used to be
there.
for $17. And
Okay.
I think there was an ad in the Kannada paper when you could advertise alcohol, and it said "Yella okay, cool drink yake, UB pint." I mean that line is burnt in my mind. I mean according to me the coolest line I've heard. So that was, and that had Upendra, the very very famous Kannada film star Upendra, holding a bottle and saying "Yalla okay, cool drink yake." Those days are gone, man. When you could just throw that on a newspaper and sell it. I mean, it's sad, but yeah, mead is essentially fermented honey.
It's essentially fermented honey.
Yes.
Yes,
it's fermented honey. As Kannadiga as I want to be.
I was going to say, you could be the Mysore, what's his name? Kingfisher. What was his name?
Yeah, the one bearing...
Malia. Mysore Malia.
Yeah, Malia, Vijay Malia. Yeah, one Kannadiga gone. I thought the next Kannadiga should come on. So anyway. But yeah, moonshine, mead is essentially fermented honey. So it's madhira, madhushala is where you drink alcohol in Sanskrit, and somrasa is what you hear it in both in Kannada or in Sanskrit. It's essentially the drink of the gods, ambrosia. Somras is what they call it in Hindi, but somrasa is what they call it in Kannada. So it's essentially drink of the gods, what people called ambrosia. Nectar of the gods. I mean, they've got multiple names. Ethiopia still calls it tej. So if you're in Ethiopia and the local liquor that they drink in villages, brewed locally by women of the space, they're actually calling it tej, and they have it every day. So it's closer to home. It predates agriculture. I mean, wine and beer just came into being a little later, but previous to all of this, it was mead. That's what started it all.
And you're bringing it back. All right, let me roll the intro and let's tuck in. Good evening and welcome to the BELOSITY podcast, where we talk about the business of art, food, and drink. I am wearing my fun shirt today because we have a fun guest. He is originally a resident and a son of the sun in Old Mysore town, where I'm based. He's no longer with us. He's descended to drier pastures, aka Pune. He's an innovator and a pioneer in his field, a passionate drinker, and a lot more. I would like to welcome this evening my guest, Nitin from Moonshine. Welcome, Nitin.
Hey, David. Thanks for having me here.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming. Just to kick off, okay, we had a brief chat before we got started about what mead is, about the fact that it actually does have a tradition in India. I always thought about mead as a Scandinavian drink or something that we would get in the southeast of England. The southwest of England, Glastonbury, Bath, that kind of thing, where it had, sort of an old lingering Roman influence, etc. But that's not true. You're saying that mead is actually as Indian as it is European, and it has a long
Indian.
history.
In fact, I think it's. I'm sorry, I interjected in the middle, but it's actually less Indian, and it's actually more. It's what started human beings on alcohol, right? Humans started on mead. Every civilization known to man, if you kind of trace it back, you will find the OG alcohol as always being mead. The Chinese civilization has mentions of mead on in their books. You will see mead in the Egyptian civilization, the Roman civilization, Indian. There's nothing called Indian civilization, but you're going to see mead mentioned in the scriptures, which essentially gives you a sense of how old this beverage is. And I mean,
So,
practically, yeah.
no, please continue. Sorry.
No, so practically every civilization known to man started with mead. It's just that it's always agriculture kicked in. It became easier to grow grape and barley. Then beers and wines came in. So it went from the drink of the masses to the drink to the from the drink of the masses. It became the drink of the classes. And then over a period of time, it completely disappeared with the Ottoman Empire coming in, discovering distillation, and now you had whiskeys and vodkas and spirits essentially dominating the alcohol scene. And with that, essentially, mead just sort of just disappeared. I mean, almost everywhere. London got its first meadery in 2012 or 13.
Really?
In over 500 years. Yeah. So it's been out of sort of fashion, and it's coming back in.
That's so interesting. Now, why has it taken so long? First, tell me, when did you finally get mead, a license to produce mead commercially? And tell me, why has it taken so long to be able to do it commercially in India?
So with India, a lot of our laws are, the ones that were written way back. I mean, when I say way back, it's pre-independence or just post-independence.
Right.
Mead never really featured there, and because we don't tend to change these. It's all fraught with a lot of political quagmire to change an alcohol law in India. Nobody
Right.
really bothered about it, and plus, it's unfortunately mead in most countries even today. It's not really available that easily. It's this whole drive towards sustainability and beekeeping and giving back to the nature, not trying to make something that's more adding value to both sides of the thing, right? Person who's having it is having fun, but it's also impacting agriculture in a very, very positive way. So this whole realization that we have been messing up with the environment, and there's sudden resurgence for mead, I think that sort of went through an absolute turbocharged mode when Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings started to pop up. So you started reading Song of Fire and Ice, you started reading these even Harry Potter has hog meads, right, where they drink. So it's suddenly these little pop culture things that suddenly got people to look at mead as a category, and then people started to research it again. And
Okay.
that's possibly, I think that's my guess, right? It's not the answer to it, but it's only for example, in 2013 there were 36 meaderies in the US. And in 2018, from what I remember as my data that I used for my pitch deck first time, it was 450 meaderies, right? So there's been a growth of meaderies happening. In India, it took us a long time because you got to get laws changed, and I mean, we had to sit
It's not
outside
going to be an
excise
easy
offices.
process.
Yeah, it's not an easy task. So it took us almost 3 years of sitting outside excise offices every day to have people understand what we were doing and sort of explain to them, how close to home we were when it comes to the alcohol and
And
the
what was the
impact on
process like
agriculture.
of like,
Yeah,
what was the process, sorry,
sorry.
Nitin, what was the process like of like explaining this to excise officers, like a category that they would be unfamiliar with? I
Yeah,
mean,
so
how do you go about
so
doing that?
you lead it with Somras and Madhira and Madhushala, to be honest. That's how you lead the whole conversation. But I think for us, we got lucky with the government officers. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to understand they haven't moved this quickly, probably. I mean, 3 years to get an absolutely new category introduced is an achievement because the system has, the bureaucracy has a lot of layers, right? But I think it was one talking about how it impacts agriculture. In Maharashtra, the state that we currently are in, the government quickly saw the whole need for because we are the third lowest producer of honey amongst the 29 states in the country. So the government
Wow.
saw a very clear need for us to sort of get into it, and they saw value in the fact that if more meaderies come up, there's going to be again a push towards beekeeping and apiculture, and that's essentially something that they saw very quickly because Maharashtra is also the state that exports the highest amount of fruits and highest amount of flowers all over the world, right? So you have this sort of a situation. You have Vidarbha like areas where you have farmers committing suicide because of drought, and you have the highest rainfall in the country happening at Mahabaleshwar, all within the state of Maharashtra. So there is
Wow,
an
that's crazy.
imbalance and that is something that we sensitize to, and then we kind of explain to them we are not distilling, we are actually naturally fermenting the honey, and that sort of drove home the point.
Listen, I mean, that's so fascinating. I didn't know about that. in terms of Maharashtra being so sort of agronomically diverse. Obviously,
Yes.
Nasik is one of the biggest wine producing regions in the country, which is in
Yeah.
Maharashtra. Does the sort of
Yeah.
wine infrastructure, the wine legislation lend itself to you being a meat producer in the States?
It does, because what the government is therefore sensitive to is grape wine making. At the end of the day, mead is still honey wine. So when you
Yeah.
kind of explain to them that you've got grape wine, you have a beautiful law that defines fruit wine. You just need to change the fermentable sugar. I mean, just turn it to honey, and we have honey wine. Every other process remains the same. So that
Right.
and because Maharashtra and in fact Karnataka, these are the only two states today which have a very well developed wine policy and a wine board, and they are therefore a lot more sensitive to these categories, because there is also a direct impact on agriculture which is local to the area. So
Yeah.
choice of state therefore was always Karnataka and Maharashtra. Maharashtra moved faster, so we went with Maharashtra.
That makes sense. And has it been a challenge to get distribution and get sort of good market penetration? Or something sort of so novel?
It's there. I mean, at the end of the day, you are struggling with the category building story, right? So it's always easier to build a brand comparatively. It's tough to build even a brand. I mean, that with Navilona, but it's always so it is very hard when you're trying to build an absolutely new category, because you don't start with here's another beer that's tastier. You actually start with, this is a mead. Mead is an alcohol made out of fermenting honey with natural fruits and spices. Moonshine, that's my brand, makes mead. So there's by the time I sort of the final punchline, I have lost 10 seconds with the customer. And you know how it is. The first 5 seconds are actually what matters. So it is hard to build a category, but it's been good because retailers have been supportive. So what happens is the retailer is willing to put a brand on the shelf if it looks nice and looks pretty. And we got a great distributor. The first place where we started was Bombay. He was a ISB grad, two batches after mine. So we sort of alumni bonding happened, and he said, what, send me your stuff, let me try and see if I can find a market for it. So there was a lot of support I got from him, and then the retail channel really helped. So it's these sort of three metrics that help, but it's taken us a while. It's still I don't think we're still even 5% in the story yet.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I can imagine so. I mean, I can definitely relate, building sort of craft chocolate in India, and craft chocolate globally, of course, is also very nascent. So sometimes I wonder, is it easier to sell our brand or is it easier to sell our products? Like what actually comes first?
Oh yeah,
And probably it's a mix of both.
completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you guys done a really
Very
great job
true,
with your
very
branding.
true.
I absolutely love it. And I got to say, like, I just think it hits the sweet spot. I mean, no pun intended, but
Pun intended. Pun intended.
But tell me, like, so moonshine is what I would describe as a semi-sparkling mead. Is that the natural mead style? Obviously, there is going to be CO2 released, and if you're not distilling it, it's all should be there. But the meads that I had in the UK, for example, in the countryside, were much flatter, much flatter,
Yes.
much flatter. So is this natural, or is this your stylistic approach?
So meads, so under meads we have melomels and you have metheglins, right? So melomels are fruit based, metheglins are spice based. Now within this category you have hydromels and a high alcohol mead. Hydromels are low alcohol mead. So you have a caste system of sorts, or not caste, but at least categorization of meads.
Sure.
And what we've tried to make is, while most meads, while the west of the country, west of the in the Western Hemisphere is very familiar with wines, and therefore making a mead which is flirting with that same area, sort of same category, is a lot easier. With India, you've been in India long enough to know that with India we're still figuring out wines. We're still not there. We're not like a hardcore wine drinking culture. We're still a very spirit forward nation. And beers are making inroads. So what we realized was, path of least resistance. You've already got a category that nobody understands. You also have a brand that people are going to be confused with. So you might as well get into a look and play the part of a category that people understand, and that's beer. So what we did is we started making hydromels. So while the West led mead, the whole mead resurgence has happened with high alcohol, 10%, 12% meads. With India and even in Southeast Asia, you'll notice that it's actually been the hydromels that have been doing the rounds. So Singapore has a couple of meaderies. We are all trying to playing this 3 to 6, 7% alcohol game. and carbonating
That's so
because of the
interesting.
tropical weather.
That's so interesting. Yeah, right. I mean, that's illuminating for me because, when I first had moonshine, I was quite surprised, obviously coming, being a bit more accustomed to the other style. Would you consider
Yeah.
eventually going into things that like resemble more a sort of a natural wine, that 10 to 12% with slight carbonation in a 750 ml bottle?
Yes. So in fact, we have a beverage called, so we've named it Marty. You'll find a few posts on Moonshine's Instagram page. Marty is essentially mud, and what we're doing with Marty is we're sourcing honey. So that's a hobby project for Rohan and me, right? So there's the business side of it, and this literally makes no business sense in India, but we like it. So we're going to make small. We're going to literally do drops in Bombay and a few markets. The idea is to buy honey from, or rather source honey from the absolute corners of the country where tribals, it's mainly inhabited with tribals, and you work with the NGOs, buy it at full rate, expensive honey, age it in oak barrels. And we've got our first batch has been aging for 18 months and it's ready. We've not released it because of the lockdowns. So it's there. If you come down to the meadery, which I've been inviting you for a while, you will try it. It's got nutty tobacco notes. It's got nutmeg, tobacco. It's got raisins. It's got so much going on, and there's literally nothing. And then there's the heaviness that comes from oak. It's beautiful. And you can have it like a liqueur. And yeah, that's Marty. So we have a bottle ready. Everything is ready. It's just that we're not putting it out in the market because it's not the right time, and it's going to be expensive. So we just don't want to test the market when the economy is a little bit in a tailspin right now. So we'll wait.
Sure.
It gets better with time. So let it get better with time.
Okay, that's such exciting news. And what kind of casks are you aging it in?
We've actually got single malt casks from Paul John, much like the ones I saw it at. So much like the ones I saw it at Navi Luna. So we're getting those. We got 4 of them now at the plant, and we've put them in those casks. So it's getting a lot of character. It's crazy. So we are also doing some tests. We have actually got some sherry cask shavings from one of these wine guys, and we're using those and seeing whether that works well. So we are using shavings in one. The other one we've actually put it into full barrels and seeing what works best. So
oh my God,
experiments are on.
I can imagine that the sherry wood casks with the flatter mead would be insane. Yeah. And I could really see French oak working beautifully. That kind of like Chardonnay style, just very light vanilla, not as sweet as say the American oak. That'd be sexy. I'm assuming that the Paul John are sort of American oak butts, 225.
They're all American oak.
Standard.
They're all American oak.
Yeah. Yep. That's crazy. Nitin, what's your passion? What's driven you? How did you get this job? Tell me a little bit more about the journey of starting Moonshine Meadery. You are a startup. What was your background? What were you doing before? What drugs did you smoke before you decided to do this?
So I
don't answer the last question.
I got a very boring pre. I don't do drugs at all. Never.
Likewise.
But of course. Anyway, so I was saying, I think pre-Moonshine was primarily McKinsey consulting, and then I moved from McKinsey to Abbott Healthcare and was selling pharmaceutical drugs. Fairly boring backgrounds pre-Moonshine. But it was, I think, during McKinsey, I was flying around Europe when I read about London's first meadery, right? I was talking to you at the beginning of the show. So it was that, and I wanted to make beer at home, and that was the plan. So I called a friend of mine, Rohan, who is my co-founder on Moonshine. We go back 35 years. So I called him up and said, you know what, there's something new I've read about. Here's WhatsApping you whatever the pictures look like. So I sent it to him, and he looks at it and says, you know what, come back. Don't fly back to Bangalore. Come back to Pune. We'll try and make a batch. And that is how we started with Moonshine. So it was zero idea about how to brew at all. So we had a 20-liter carboy, a bung on top, a little airlock, and store-bought commercial honey, Lalwin EC 1118 yeast, and we had a wet cloth, a towel actually. So we wrapped the towel around the bottle, around the 20-liter carboy, wet it, and yeah, that's about it. We just we let it ferment its way. We went on to Reddit Reddit was our first sort of recipe that we got. We had no clue. We both don't come from hospitality, so we have literally no idea
Yeah.
on how fermentation works. And we let this thing ferment for 2.5 months. We in fact, Rohan is a stickler for everything, so he likes to write down notes. I don't function with a notebook many a times. So Rohan has the
Okay.
first notes. We've got every recipe that we have ever made. So I think almost 600, 500, 600 recipes. So the first recipe is called Patience. He actually named it Patience, and it took us 2.5 months to make it. It tasted like rocket fuel. We got absolutely hammered on the first batch, and Rohan said, "I'm never making this again." And I said, "No, no, no, this is working well. I mean, one glass, I'm exactly where I want to be, and possibly a little higher." So I said, "Let's make another one." So we made the first one, we made it again, and we kept making more and more. And it was around, I think, the second and the third batch that Rohan realized that there was more a science to this than just throwing things in and hoping that it's going to ferment out. And that was around the time when we started
Wow.
buying books. So we weren't getting books in India because mead making even on Amazon wasn't available. So we used Rohan's brother's account in the US, bought a few books. His brother sent it down to us, and then started the whole education process where we started reading about how you make mead. And one thing led to the other. We kept making more and more, kept getting better at it. We used to note down everything, and then the brewing circuit within Pune and Bombay is very strong. So
Okay.
those guys, if you go down to them with a problem, so there's this guy, you probably know him, Oliver, from Dulali. So he's been our guru for sorts. So we used to go to Oliver, we used to
Amazing.
go down to the folks at IBC, and we went to these guys and said, "Tell us what's going wrong with the beverage," and they would tell us, "Why don't you do this?" And surprisingly for Oliver, his first ever batch of brew was always a mead. So he was, this is coming
Wow.
back to me after so many years. So he was very, very helpful. We learned a lot with these trial and errors constantly. And slowly and steadily, we reached a place where we said, now we are getting the beverage right. Now is the time to
Yeah.
sort of get a little more professional with it. So it was around Christmas of 2018. Rohan sent 10 emails to random meaderies in the US saying free Indian labor, willing to work if you're willing to teach. And four
Wow.
wrote back to us saying, "Come down." And
Wow.
so Rohan, I was still working, so I said, "I'm not quitting." And this was around the time that Rohan had quit his job to move back to Pune to start working with excise to move the thing on. I had EMIs to pay, so I just
Sure.
chose. I just bought a house and everything, so I said, I can't quit. So
Yeah.
then Rohan went down to the US, couch surfed, lived in a random old lady's house who promised to drop him to the Maidry and pick him up if he promised to cook for her for the period of time he was there. So we did all these crazy things. We worked in a lot of meaderies and they were exceedingly nice to us. I mean, I remember one of the meaderies where the guy was literally telling us how he was making everything to the last tea. And Rohan said, "You're giving me your trade secrets. Are you okay with that?" He like, say, there are a lot of Indians who come down to America. If you end up setting up a meadery and the meat tastes like shit, they come down to America, they won't try our meats. So you know what? I'm just trying to ensure you don't go wrong there. So people are excited. It's
Very
you
good.
laugh about it, but you laugh about it actually. But then when you think about it, it's so nice to hear that. So we've made it a point. So we have random interns coming and working with us, and we're more than happy to see everything that we're working on. Just get if you set up a meadery, please don't get the liquid wrong because we are so few of us. if if the
Yeah.
first mead is a mead that people don't like, they will never touch another mead. So
Bang on.
that's big shout out to Colony Meadery, by the way, Pennsylvania. So it's how it all started, and then we came back. We started to get better with the beverage, and then we finally got we managed to get the license. So the day we got our license, Rohan started nudging me to quit. I had still not sold. I had decided I'll sell off the house because I didn't want the EMI problem on me. But he realized this guy isn't going to quit his job. So he wrote a Facebook post saying, "I'm so happy Nitin is finally quitting Abbott to join Moonshine," and tagged my bosses on it. So yeah. I got him to
Stella,
remove the
what a
post, but
move.
the damage was already done. And my bosses had started seeing me sort of talking about meats all the time, with colleagues over lunch. And then there was this time when I remember in fact, the managing director used to work under him. He called me in and said, it's time. One, I saw the Facebook post. Two, I can see it taking away a lot of brain time for you. So I think you should kind of quit and follow your passion, see where it goes. And he was nice enough to be here. Actually, I think somebody from that he knew, he connected me to somebody who ended up investing in us as well. So that was a nice thing. But yeah, that's how I finally threw in my papers, uh, moved from Bombay back to Pune, and we started setting up Moonshine. That's the story of how it all started.
What a story! What a story! And you've never looked back since. I mean, that's insane. But that is so nice to have such a good, strong partner. I've spoken to Rohit briefly. We never met in person. But that must, I mean, obviously startups are hard and there are dark days. And I just think that must be so nice to have such a good, supportive partner who's been with you from the beginning to really make the difference. And
I know
get
him
through
since
some of the
35 years. I know him
come.
longer than I. Yeah, so I'm sorry. I was saying I know him for so long. I know him longer than I know my sister, right? And we've been great friends.
Wow.
We first jobs we moved in together in Bombay, and we've lived in Mufusal corners of India together because our dads used to work at the same company. So known him for a very long time. So what that gives you is, one, there's a lot of trust, and second, you can be absolutely assholes with each other, and you still know that there's the relationship won't break, and you're still doing what you like to do.
Yeah.
So we're horrible. The team is afraid of us. You should see the meetings. So when he and I don't agree on 9 out of 10 points, ever, not by a choice. It's we just don't agree on a lot of things, and it works brilliantly because one thing that we have is a lot of respect for each other. So that works, and the team goes silent because then we are quarreling on the call, right? So initially, the guys who first started working with us were like, what's happening here? Is there going to be a problem? But now most of our guys have seen us for like 3 years now, 3.5 years. So they know these fellows are again quarreling. I mean, they'll figure their shit out. We're going to do this. So it works well. We bring a certain difference in the way we think to the table all the time. And that sort of gives us there's always something you're challenging the other person on. And at the end of the day, that helps. So, but yeah, that's how it is. The relationship can get, in terms of work, we quarrel a lot.
Jesus Christ. I personally, I don't have the appetite for that. I mean, I suppose, it's a different setup, but I mean, that's amazing that you can do that. But I think being candid and the ability to be candid is so important in business. And I find
yes,
even myself, coming from a London and a South African background, and especially being surrounded by a lot of working class people.
Yeah.
That's just the way that I've always worked, and especially coming from bars and hospitality and whatever. Of course, with your customers, there's a certain way of presenting yourself. But behind the scenes and in business, it's candid as fuck.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of people tiptoeing and trying to hold face and stuff. And I'm like, mate, there is no time. This is a fucking startup. At the end of the day, if I can't be candid with my colleagues, I don't have partners per se, but say even investors, at the end of the day, if I can't speak my mind, then what the fuck are we going to, because then everyone is just tiptoeing around each other. And then everything just becomes a sort of diluted vision of what was there to begin with. So, I mean, the fact that you can do that and still maintain a very respectful relationship, I think is powerful, man. And then, of course, you get the best of both worlds. So you get the diversity of perspective.
That helps. Yeah.
What about your investors? What about the people who've helped build the business, etc.? Have they been very supportive? Have they gotten out your way? Do they get in your way? I mean, obviously, without I don't want to get into things that you can't discuss, but just what's that relationship like?
Again, got great investors so far. Nobody asks us why we are doing something. The only time when they believe that they've not seen at least let me look for the right word. They've not seen a pattern in the past of having done something like this and succeeded. That's when they flag it. But there's never a push back to it because in their words, and I'll quote one of my investors, he's like, you're the guy who's got the most to lose. It's not us. When we are investing money, it's money. And we are investing typically 5% of our sort of net worth, within the 5% realms of our net worth. It's not as risky as it is for us, as it is for you. So if you believe you're going to do that, right, and if you think that's going to help you, I think you've got a lot more at stake. So we're going to back you either
Yeah.
way. So far, I have had fantastic investors. They're in the round of fundraising, so I hope we don't end up with a few bad apples. But so far, so good. Uh,
I'm so
they've
happy to
left
hear that,
us
man.
operate, and we've been, because we were also very scared to not scale up too quickly, because in an alcohol business in India, which is heavily regulated, you don't want to make a small mistake in a step taken wrong, and then
Yeah.
you would end up burning a lot of things. It's irreversible many a times. So we've been
Yeah.
very, very conscious of taking steps slowly, and these are the same folks who invest in big ass companies, and or other small companies with big ass ideas, and who scale up also quickly because they're dot coms. So these are folks who've seen businesses grow in that style, and when they see me and Rohan kind of taking careful steps, slower steps, they're supportive of it. The way they look at us is, you guys know best. Yeah,
That's great.
like I said, fingers crossed.
Touch wood, lots of wood. Yeah, it's all wood on my desk.
Yeah,
That's
lots
amazing.
of wood.
I
Yeah, lots
definitely
of
think,
wood.
yeah. I think that is one of my biggest concerns with a sort of a passion-driven business, where product is really important. And of course, in FMCG, we can't make product iterations as fast as say tech can. I mean, maybe I'm underestimating how fast tech moves. I don't know, because I'm not a programmer. I don't have that skill, but for sure, like, we have to build infrastructure to be able to create products, etc. And like, I think there is this balance between needing the speed and the agility of a startup, but then also having to make, like you said, those cautious scaling steps in FMCG so that we don't burn ourselves out or make, or scale up mistakes.
Yeah.
And it definitely requires the right kind of investor mentality. I mean, one of my biggest fears is getting, an investor come in and then just trying to pull the business apart and then reorganize it, as per their vision, because they sort of whimsically think that this is the way things should be. And I think it's one of the biggest dangers in terms of not just diluting on the cap table, but diluting your vision. So, I mean, I'm really happy to hear that
True.
you guys have had a good experience with that. What are your hopes and what are your hopes and dreams? Where do you think Moonshine will be in the next 10 years in India and globally? And where do you think mead will be in India in the next 10 to 15 years?
I think mead in India is an easier answer. It's been nice to see meaderies popping up across the country. So I know for a fact that there's a meadery coming up in Chandigarh called No Label. There is a meadery that's coming up in Karnataka. They still don't have a final name yet. I think they call themselves Foundry Meadery or something like that. But it's nice to see that, outside of Maharashtra, there are already 2-3 brands that are coming up. Within Maharashtra, I know within the state, we know almost 4-5 meaderies that are coming up. 2 have already come up. Serana Meads is already here, and a bunch of more meaderies which were to come up but then got slowed down because of the lockdown. But I think it's nice to see that people are realizing that in India, meads might actually work just because of the sheer nature of the texture and the taste, right? If you keep it 6.5%, keep it a little sweet, Indians have a sweeter palate. And that's something that I think is it's fairly codified and people know it. So in India, I see a lot more meaderies coming in, and which is great for us, because now we don't need to scream out saying, we are different, they are beers. Now it's we are meads and they are beers. So it's always it help grows the pie. I think globally it's been slower. I think seltzer suddenly came in from nowhere and just went whoop up.
What?
Right? So,
where the fuck did seltzer come from? It's crazy.
And I can't understand why they're moving so much. I mean, it's just my ignorance, I'm sure. But I've had the seltzers White Claw. I've had them, and
I also think that
still don't
maybe
see the value.
I think we're 20 years too old for seltzer. I think we missed the boat a long time ago.
It's also that's what my teams told me. It's like, you're just the wrong audience. I mean, nobody's trying to cater to you. So I'm like, okay. So,
Actually,
but yeah,
I saw seltzer in Mysore.
I'm
I was like, what is going on? Sorry.
the bro seltzer, if I'm not mistaken.
We have it here in
I think it's called the
Kumpanagoda.
bro
There's
seltzer.
the White Horse. Yeah, I forget that a white label, looks very similar to an American brand. I think
Bro
Maharashtrian.
seltzer.
It's actually called Bro
Yes,
Seltzer.
it's called bro seltzer.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Right. Anyway, moving on.
So the problem. we're not going to discuss that. But I'm hoping that people start seeing meads for what they are.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful. Now the beauty is now in America there are a bunch of meads that are getting made like the way we are making our meads, is low alcohol, 3 to 6% alcohol, and lots of fruits added to it. So I think it's a matter of time before it starts moving up. I mean, I'm hoping. But having said that, I think for moonshine, the way we've kind of made meads and the way we'll continue to make meads, we're hoping that it's going to be a brand that's in every continent around the world. We are aggressively trying to look for importers. I think the problem that most of us that we face each time we talk to a person is we don't want a meat. I've not seen meat selling much here, and each time we are forced to tell people, let us send you a sample because our meats don't taste like the meats that you've had in your country.
Yeah.
And more often than not, after they try the product, they're like, oh, this is different. We didn't expect it to look like this. We didn't expect it to taste like this. And it's a good thing and it's a bad thing because I get a lot of no's even before I send a sample down. So, I think once the situation around the world stabilizes, you'll see me packing my bags and just traveling. I need people to know what we're making and how we're making it. So let's see. I mean, it's a matter of time. In 10 years, we hope to be a global brand, but base firmly rooted here in Pune.
Beautiful.
So, yeah, that's the story.
And Nitin, tell me, I'm sure you must have read or come across the book, The Secret Life of Bees. Tell me about the relationship between bee agronomy and bee agriculture and mead. What role does mead and mead production play in the preservation of bees? Obviously, we've had the last decade, we've seen declines in bee populations. Yes. As we all know, bees are incredibly important for the human food chain. That's why they've been revered in Indian society, in ancient Egyptian society, in ancient Greek society. They literally are one of the most important animals, and humanity depends on them. What can mead do to support bee cultivation and bee colonies and bee populations around the world?
I think the one big change that meads do is it creates a consumption sector for honey. And the more you are not anymore dependent on how much honey goes on a pancake or on a slice of bread, but you can actually take 300 to 500 kilos of honey at one shot and turn it into mead. And that's got a larger sort of demographic. It's alcohol, so it's almost always easier to sort of push it. And what it does is it creates, in India in particular, so right, there's a fabulous metric, and I might get my numbers wrong, but the difference is the same, right? In Germany, if I'm not mistaken, they consume I think 2 kilos of honey per capita consumption is 2 kilos, and in India it is 10 grams. 10 grams, I think 10 grams, 20 grams of honey per capita. Per year. Even keep the per person per year. And even if you keep the fact that there's a huge population, so this might happen, and honey is expensive, so people might not have it. Keep all that aside. You look at what Indians have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Anybody, anywhere else, you'll see honey practically does not play a part in our diet. You don't see it. The only place where you see honey sort of coming in is when you're taking medicine, because Ayurveda has a base in honey. You know the word medicine comes from this Welsh word methicillin, which means mead with spices. So honey plays a big role in Indian culture, but through medicines, through Ayurveda. You don't see as much of consumption of honey as you would see in the West, where you're drizzling it on toast, you're drizzling it on pancakes, you're drizzling it on so many things, right? And what mead is essentially, and that's one of the reasons why we feel when the more we have meaderies in India, you're now giving the average beekeeper an option to sell it at a much higher price to a meadery, because the meadery's value adding on it is turning it into an alcohol, which he can price it even further in terms of expense. I mean, in terms of revenue. So what happens is you're essentially creating this huge consumption base, and that's exactly what we are hoping more meaderies in India will do. And more meaderies abroad will do, because I remember there's a meadery in Chicago, that Chicago has a permission. They have permissions to actually set up bee boxes on top of houses up to a certain height. And what this meadery does is it taps these apartment complexes, gets their honey and turns it into mead. So in a funny sort of way, it's actually helping the Chicago ecosystem as well. So the impact is beautiful. It's local, and the more amount of beekeeping you do, your agricultural yield goes up from 10x to 400x depending on the crop you grow it.
Wow,
So
that's insane.
so that's the beauty of it. So the way we see in India, and I'll be very specific and local to India, there is the more we have meaderies coming in, the easier it is for an average beekeeper who would have otherwise sold it at double-digit figures per kilo to a large brand. He can now sell it at three digits per kilo
Wow.
to a company like us who are happy to buy 500 kilos, 800 kilos, 1,000 kilos and turn it into mead.
And I would guess that, obviously because you are an alcohol and the value addition is much higher than, say, regular honey, as you said, for food use, surely you're able to plow more money backwards down the value chain
Yeah,
into
yeah, yeah.
beekeeping and into bee agronomy, etc.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So we the whole moonshine honey project started from there. We started buying honey initially from aggregators and from beekeepers, and then we realized why not set
Okay.
up our own boxes as well. And now we have
Amazing.
boxes being set up in multiple places. Small beekeepers who are connecting with us and sort of almost franchising out this whole piece and saying, we will keep the bees. You buy the honey from us at X rates, and we're happy to give it. So
Yeah.
for they are already confident of the rate they're going to get it at. So this whole thing,
Yeah.
it just works in a nice, beautiful way, right? And that's helping.
That's really powerful, and I think that it's such a good USP for meats in general. It's like, hang on, man, like you want a great drink, but you can also do a lot for the environment, and like obviously at the risk of sounding like one is greenwashing something, because it's so sad to see so many brands greenwashing, and coming up with all this like marketing bullshit. But at the same time, like there's a really tangible positive cycle in terms of like environmental impact and what you're producing, which is probably where meat came from originally.
Yes. Yes.
Talk to me about the yeast that you guys use at Moonshine. Obviously, I know you can't reveal your strain, but do you work more with like natural yeasts? Are you cultivating? Are they cultured yeasts? Are the yeasts more like champagne yeasts? Like what? Because like for the folks out there who are like very technical, it's really interesting.
Yeah. So I'm going to take a shot at this answer because I'll be honest, I have strayed away from production in the last 2 years. But
Okay.
what we do is we don't use natural yeast at all. All our yeasts
Okay.
are either white wine yeast or champagne yeasts, and we change it as per the fruit we're using. We change it as per the honey we are using, and we stay away from the natural yeast because they have a tendency to sometimes hurt the product. And there is a certain so while we are happy with so the yeast adds a lot of flavor to the beverage. You definitely know that. So what happens is if you get the so if aromas, everything changes with the yeast. So there is a certain degree of standardization you want with the liquid, and you're happy with a few here and there changes, right? And you can always say that that's because of the honey changing or the fruits changing or the seasons changing. So that little difference is great, but we try and not bring too much of difference in the product because then it becomes very hard to control. So what we try and do is we use typical white wine champagne yeast. We have certain strains that we work with, and that's about it. We never try and ferment naturally.
Yeah, I suspected that there was a champagne yeast in there, I have to say. Because you had like a very tight bubble. Yeah, very, very tight bubble. Yes. And I think that's one of the appeals to me. It's a little bit slightly dry, in fact. And like I was saying to you before we got started, like for me, like with a meal, especially in Goa, like some chorizo, some pork, like the nicest thing is just a crisp, slightly sweet.
It works very
Oh
well.
my God, like on a hot summer's day, it is just the best thing. But really, really what I would love to see is... Now. I gotta say, you're making me thirsty. I'm not the one making me. Yeah, and like a natural wine style, more flat mead as well would just be something like so up my alley. I'm guessing that the quality of the honey that you're working with must be also really, really important. Where are you guys sourcing the honey from? Are you working specifically with very local growers? Are you sort of sourcing from around the country? Is provenance really important to you? Are you looking for sort of honeys from different areas, or is like consistency and standardization more important?
So it's more we're working with beekeepers around the country. Specific locations isn't something that we are still very, very particular about, except for Marti, the high alcohol meats that I spoke to you about. That's where the origin matters, where it's coming from matters, because a lot of flavors change with that. But with most of our honeys that we otherwise get, I think almost 30-40% comes from one aggregator in Himachal, and the rest of it comes from beekeepers around the country. So what's happened is, in that 3 years time when we had little to do and government was still sort of getting this whole thing on the road, uh, Rohan had time to go down to the Central Bee Research Institute, which is surprisingly and thankfully in Pune, and he did a complete course in beekeeping. So what that gave us is access to beekeepers that you wouldn't have otherwise. And now the beekeepers know that you are willing to buy 400 kilos and 500 kilos at a time, because for them to sell, let's say, an ajwain honey or caraway as they call it, or even orange blossom or something of that sort, they don't know whom to sell 400 kilos to. So
Sure.
if they can either sell it to a large business house who would then mix it up with all the other honeys, or now they
Yeah.
have somebody like us, and that's exactly what I said when I spoke a little earlier. That now you have someone who's willing to buy it at a higher price and is willing to buy smaller volumes, as in 400 kilos, 1,000 kilos. We are happy to pick that up. So now we have a bunch of beekeepers who call us every few months and tell us, I've got this new honey, I'm sending it down to you. Try it. If you like it, I've got so many kilos, I will send it. So that's given
Wow.
us the ability to come up with these new batches that we keep doing. So the mead lab batches that we do, many times the honey, a separate special honey that would have come to us, we'll pair that with that special fruit and we'll ferment that out. So we do that a lot, and now that is how it keeps working for us. So while there's a large chunk that comes in, like 30-40% comes from one person, where it's a lot more standardized. But again, all these honeys are the honey that we get from the aggregator is US FDA approved. We ensure that there is
Okay.
no impurities in it, and if there is, we
Yeah.
find out because the yeast test refuses to ferment after a point. So
Right.
so that's how we are approaching this whole thing. So it's a
That's
mixed bag,
fascinating.
and
And is provenance something that
it's
you'd be
fun.
looking to explore in the future?
In the future for sure. So with Marty we have started to realize, so one thing with that is the location starts to shine when you push it up a notch on the alcohol. So when it's at 6%,
Oh,
7%,
wow.
there is some degree of change. For example, the cider honey mead, we brought it out under the name Project X, and the reason we did
Okay.
Project X was because at the back label on the ingredients it'll read honey water yeast, right? And now we could
Sure.
keep that consistent, and we could keep changing the honey that we're using to make Project X, and hence the name Project X. So the first batch was made
Okay.
using cedar honey, which we got from Rajasthan. The second batch of it is
Okay.
we're playing around with mustard honey and seeing how that turns out. And we're also doing some
Yeah.
trials with acacia honey that we've got. And we're going to keep doing these trials as and when we get new honeys. And whichever one really shines beautifully, where the honey flavors and taste translate into the liquid, you'll see that coming out is again Project X, where the batch number on the Project X matters, because that batch number can be coded back to the type of honey that was used. So
That's
that's what we're trying
amazing.
to do with Project
I
X.
mean, for myself, like I think that is so interesting as a consumer, is to like start to taste meads from, different flowers, as you're saying, whether it's an acacia or a mustard, for example. I mean, I've definitely seen that with honeys, and like even for us when we're working with
Yes,
pastry, picking and choosing our honeys makes a huge difference. If we want more body, more
yes,
floral notes, more sort of basil overtones
yeah,
or herbaceousness. And I think also it means that like we can take an ingredient a little bit more, not seriously, but like just being able to get into that nuance, and we can just fine tune, as opposed to saying
yeah,
this is meat and meat is, a static
correct.
ingredient, or honey is a static ingredient. I mean, it's really, really interesting. And I think it's something that the market will respond to, probably the on trade, pastry chefs and bartenders, etc. at
Hmm.
the beginning, but then I'm sure the public and the off trade will follow. Listen,
So
the
if I have
journey,
to, if yeah, sorry,
yeah, no,
no, no,
please.
no, carry on, please. No, I was just saying, I mean, if you ever come down to the Meadery, we actually do a honey tasting at the beginning, very similar to what you did when we came down, right, with chocolates. So we
Okay.
have like 6 types of honey, and we get people to use their fingers, dip, try, and we do the same thing, because it's so different from what most people know honey as.
I find that honey tastes better on other people's fingers, especially.
Of
Yeah,
course,
of
of
course,
course.
of course.
I
Anyway, that
can't,
could also be
I
part of the
can't agree
experience.
more.
I think that's something you guys should be considering. Don't tell your wife I said that, though. I'll get into a lot of trouble. She seems like a dangerous woman, in all the best possible ways. I love it. So, are the public able to come down to the Moonshine Meadery? Do you guys have a sort of public expose?
Yes. Yes, we do. So
Okay, that's
we call
awesome.
it the meadery tour, where we get people in, we get them to see how the mead's being made, and then there's this whole honey tasting that we end up doing. Meads is only a byproduct of the whole process. So what we try and focus is on how we can build variety just using honey, because to make somebody go wow on the mead is not that difficult, because anyway the product's also out there. But with honey, we get a chance to sit down and tell people this has come from here. This is why the honey tastes different. This is why the honey is grainy on the finger. And we explain to people that why honey crystallizes, because most people in India think if it crystallizes, it's bad honey. And you got to explain to people
Why
that
does it
crystallized
crystallize?
honey is not bad. If a honey doesn't crystallize, so it's the sugar starts
Why does
to
it
get
crystallize?
together and starts to coagulate. Not every honey. I mean, if it's just kept aside
Okay.
for a long time, if you don't disturb it, you tend to start seeing settling that happens. There's a segregation that happens, which can, again, you can mix it, put it back in a double boiler and get it back normal. Two honeys that don't crystallize ever is acacia and cedar. Every other honey is going to crystallize.
Okay.
It has to crystallize. If it doesn't crystallize, question your honey. If it's not cedar and not acacia, there is a problem.
Interesting. Yeah, and obviously, there has been a lot of noise made over the last 10 years, especially supermarkets and supermarket white label brands of fake honey, faux honey, a lot of it coming from China. Sorry, China. But that is the labs have just revealed that there's a lot of sugar. Even Cork, right next to us in Mysore, there's a lot of sugar being added to quote unquote honey.
Yes.
Is that a challenge for you guys? Is purity a challenge, or have you got systems in place?
We get our share of bad honey every now and then. When so a beekeeper will send us one vial which tastes great, but when the product comes in, you start realizing there's something wrong with it. And then so the learnings for us after making a few mistakes is we make the final payment after we've got the large shipment in. But it's been a challenge. It's always a challenge to do that. But what happens is if you do this a couple of times, the word gets around and you don't get bad honey after that. So that helps.
That makes sense. And how good is Indian honey? Let me put a simple question to you: Is Indian honey good?
It's very good. I mean, Indian honey is great because you got a large forest cover in this country, and you can get some really good honey, but you need to look for it. Moonshine Honey Project is one, but there's a brilliant brand called Under the Mango Tree, right? And their honey is absolutely phenomenal. And Vijaya and Sangeeta, the two women who are behind Under the Mango Tree, have been making some great honey available to us. It's expensive. That's the only problem with good honey, because that's the price you pay for quality. And unfortunately, it's not very easily available everywhere. So that's where the challenge comes. But Sangeeta, in fact, works with villagers, works with tribal, teaches them beekeeping, gets them to start doing beekeeping, and then buys the honey from them. I mean, that's the kind of work that these folks do. So something that we are trying to emulate at Moonshine Honey Project is that for us, they are the role models when it comes to what we should be doing with honey. So you can get some great honey in this country. Unfortunately, it's the bigger brands are so big that they make more noise and therefore they get more attention.
That's interesting. And Nitin, like one of the common sites I've seen on the streets here in Mysore and a little bit in Bangalore is sort of folks who come, they're definitely from outside of town. They say that they come from the jungles, etc., or the forests, and they've got these pots full of honey with a big honeycomb and a couple of dead bees floating in. Is that sustainable? What is the story behind all of that?
It's so two things, right? So you never destroy a hive. When you want to take, so when you see a hive that looks like this, it's the bees are living at the bottom side of the hive. On the top section is where the food is, and that's where your honey is. When you take the hive out, you don't break it, because if you break it, where do they go back to? So what you need to do is you need to smoke it a little bit, and you literally need to go hourglass on the hive. Just take out the honey from the sides, leave some honey back for them, and leave their home back for them. When you break the hive, you've practically destroyed the bees. It's going to take them a while before they build their home, and a lot of bees will die in the process. So from a sustainability standpoint, not at all right. But then the tribals, if it's a proper local tribe, they've probably taken this care, right? If somebody is from a local tribal area in and around the area you just mentioned, they probably have taken care of it. But even they, it's very hard to distinguish whether it's clean honey or not so clean honey. So I would be very scared to touch it, because some of them greed's unfortunately very human. Right? It's very human rather to be greedy. So you will notice them that some of them end up adding stuff, increasing volumes. You got to be careful. I
Right.
wouldn't pick up honey
Yeah.
from folks like that unless and until I'm with
Yeah,
the
it's
person when they're tapping the bees, the honey from the bees.
so interesting. But I could definitely see scope for a company to come into that sort of supply chain, work with those people, education, and then create some sort of verifiable
So
sustainability.
So it's interesting that you say this, because Karnataka has something called the Lantern Foundations. I might have gotten the exact name wrong. It's called Lantern something
Okay.
Foundations, which are all over BR Hills, Coorg, that entire belt, Chikmagalur. It's peppered around that area, and
Okay.
these foundations help beekeeping and coffee and a few other thing. And they have centers where you can sell it and recover your money.
Okay.
Unfortunately, they've been dying. I mean, they've been declining. I remember speaking to Arshreya from Black Bazaar Coffee. She does a lot
Oh
of work
yes.
with these guys, and
Okay.
her coffees are never from large estates. They're always from smaller spaces. And she was telling me the number
Sure.
of sort of foundations have fallen to from 2 lakhs and 3 lakhs, I think, to 40,000. I remember recently I'd spoken to her. So this is
Jesus.
unfortunately where it's going, right? So people, and one of the reasons why I think meaderies will help in India is because now you're creating this whole space for consumption to start, a mass consumption to start, and that's great.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of the widespread adoption of mead, could you see a sort of working man's mead, something at a sort of a competitive price point to cheaper beers or cheaper whiskeys? Obviously, there is a quality price parity issue that has to, the Tetra Pak whiskey.
Yeah.
I'm very afraid of, and I don't think it's a healthy thing. But something along those lines, a more affordable mead. Do you think local meaderies could be a sustainable and successful project? Where every sort of town has its own meadery and it's making affordable, for working
That's
communities.
that will be ideal. That will be ideal. That will be ideal
I
if you can
can
have meads. I mean, similar to local breweries, have local meaderies which are supporting the
exactly.
sort of ecosystem around that town. That's perfect.
Yeah,
And then if you're
yeah.
not, so
I
once you're putting
think
it into a bottle, David, the problem is you got to have pay for all those distribution costs. If you're making it locally
right.
for the locals in that area, your costs come down so much more, and you're able to price it so much easier.
Right. Right. I think back to South Africa that I mean, obviously it was a very bad, it was a horrible system, but during the apartheid era, a lot of factories had their own beer making facilities on the factory estates, on the industrial estates,
Mm.
where the workers of those factories would get their beer from. And that tradition also continued
Yeah,
into places like Soweto, even in Khayelitsha today, and it's still there. Those local breweries still exist, and they're not
nice.
totally sort of industrial phenomenon in South Africa amongst like Zulu and Xhosa communities. The women have traditionally always made beer, similar to what you see in South America. And there is a sort of a
Yeah,
village tradition of making beer from corn, especially, and maize, which
mm.
is obviously the key carbohydrate of Southern Africa.
Nice.
And I could imagine a similar working model, which is really affordable for people here, and especially because it's just so much healthier, I imagine. And I can imagine also much cleaner
Yes,
alcohols coming off something like honey.
yeah. So it's gluten free. So yeah, the health aspect, and I think the way Rowan puts it is very nice. Is all the good things that come from honey are actually in the mead. They change very little,
Mm.
and it's a tasty beverage. I mean, literally the versatility of nature can be thrown into it. So your fruits, your flowers that are grown in your area can be taken and put into a mead, and you get all those flavors coming out of mead. And it's almost like a white canvas. You paint it the color you want, and that
That's
works.
awesome. Now, Nitin, to move on to something a little bit more controversial. I know you're a South Indian boy, and Mysore is home, and you made this coffee mead, which tasted like how do I put it nicely? Filter coffee. But in Delhi, I talk about filter coffee. They have like so romance, as if like Alice in Wonderland. like a frog or a toad just turn into a prince. And I just don't understand it. I mean, I've grown up with espresso coffee. Maybe it's just a cultural thing. I have no love for filter coffee. Let me just say that right now. I have zero love, zero. It's bitter. It is full of chicory. Why are we putting chicory in our coffee? I have no idea. I know. Cancel my visa. What are we going to do? But you did that. And I love the idea of your coffee mead. I wasn't in love with the coffee you used.
Yeah.
However, it sounds like the frog has turned into a prince. And I see a very interesting collaboration with a little coffee shop in Bandra.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit more about the Subco collab.
Yeah. Wow, that's so. Let me also start this. I love filter coffee, for the records.
Sure. Fine.
But I'm not the biggest fan of coffee mead. The coffee mead actually was created when Rohan made mead, and I was taking it back to Bombay, and I put it in a plastic bottle, and I just, for the fun of it, threw a few beans of coffee beans into it, and it turned into coffee mead by the time I reached Bombay, right? From Pune. So that's how we made coffee mead for the first time. So I'm not a big fan of coffee mead. I've tried convincing the team that we should kill that SKU, but unfortunately or fortunately, we have this huge fan following around it. And there are folks who love moonshine but hate coffee mead, and there are folks who love coffee mead but hate moonshine for everything else. So when you get that kind of polarization with the audience, you let the SKU live. But so Subco's collab was something else altogether. I actually went back to the meadery, and in fact I ended up buying a few pints because you're only allowed an X quota from the meadery. So I went and bought a few pints of Subco coffee. It's that good, right? And so what we did with this was Rahul Reddy, a big shout out to him. So he and Rohan sort of came up with this whole idea. They had a specific estate where they sourced their coffee beans from. From that estate, the coffee beans came down first in their green format to moonshine. We aged them in a mead here for, if I'm not mistaken,
you aged the green beans in the mead. Sorry to interrupt.
So we aged the green beans in a mead, and then we sent the green beans back. He roasted those beans. Now he turned a bit of that. So he turned a bit of that roasted beans into coffee. And I kid you not, I have never, when I took a sip of that coffee, I got wine-like notes in the coffee. And so I called up Rohan from Subco saying, dude, this actually tastes damn good. So he's like, I told you, because I kept thinking this whole thing is all pretentious, it's not going to work, right? And then, I'll be honest, so that's where Rohan and I are so different, right? So for me, sales matters, the marketing bit is all, I won't pay too much attention to it. Whereas for Rohan, the marketing and the brand story matters. So I said, this is just pretentious stuff. It just look nice. But when I had the coffee there at Subco, I was like, wow. So I called Rahul. I told him, dude, this tastes outstanding. So he's like, yes, I told you so. So both of them had that I told you so moment. And then those beans were brought back to the meadery. And they were again aged on a traditional mead. Wow. For a longer time with a higher dosing. And when we finally tasted the product, it tastes like a coffee stout. I mean, it's thinner.
Oh my God.
It's thinner, but it's got such sharp. You're an espresso drinking guy. It's got all those characteristics that an espresso has here, right? It's absolutely on point. And my mom hates coffee mead in general. She just doesn't like it. And So I have these little tasting glasses. I poured a small sample for her. She tried it. She's like, give me the rest of the bottle. I'm going to have the whole thing this time. It's that good. So
wow,
it's got yeah. So it's actually a beautiful mead. For the first time, I ate humble pie on this one. And I said, you know what, you guys actually pulled off something that is outstanding between the two of you. And that's when we first initially thought we're going to just package it into another coffee mead bottle and say, great coffee mead. But then when we tried the final product, and it took us 6 months of trial, right? When we finally tried the product, we said this one deserves a separate label altogether. And that's when we came up with a different label that brought in both brands and on the front label, not a mention somewhere on the back, because there was a lot of work that happened with Rahul and his team and Rohan and the team at Meadery in kind of creating this product, tweaking it, changing the roast, changing the bean, changing the time it was kept in the mead. All these, there were multiple parameters and combinations that were tried and tested, and finally this was the one that we scaled up. But I promise you, this is going to change your change your opinion when it comes to Subco and coffee and coffee mead in
Well,
particular.
I mean, I'm in love with the Subco brand. I've been in Mysore since the first lockdown. I haven't left the States, except for like, a little bit, some quick business trips to Goa. But I've not tasted the products. I hope and I would like to think that the product is as good as the branding. From what I'm hearing from folks, even from yourself and from others, it is as good. And the guys seem to be really on point. Two key takeaways from what you just said: 6 months of R&D, exploring multiple variables and nuances, and I can't stress this enough. I mean, we do a little bit of R&D here and there for other brands as well. And in Instagram, we seem to be living in an Instagram business ecosystem. People have forgotten that real products take time. Even if you've got I've been in the business 18 years. But in spite of all that experience, if we're trying to create something that's original, there's definitely going to be trial and error. There's definitely going to be mistakes, irrespective of how many years experience you have. So I'm just so happy to hear you say that, because I've been struggling to underscore that point to colleagues and clients. And I think that's so important. And also for up and coming, aspiring pastry chefs and stuff, they just think that it's going to come like this. And the reality is that if it was that easy, everyone would be doing it. So, I mean, that's definitely my first takeaway. Number two, Alva, and second point, which I have to say, and I noticed this, the first thing I noticed was how beautifully aligned the two brands are in the packaging. You guys have executed that flawlessly. And the truth of design is that the more seamless and easy it seems, the more difficult it actually is. That's the irony. So just hands down to all of you guys. To
I think kudos to the
to
team. It's both the teams that worked.
No, it's excellent. It's excellent. I'm dying to try the product, and I'm hoping is that it's the coffee mead that I wish I tasted the first time I tasted the original coffee mead, and I'm sure. By the description, it sounds like it is.
No, so if I'm going to be coming down to Mysore or Bangalore in July, I will keep aside a couple of points for you. So like I did last time, I'm going to bring them this time. I have to change your opinion of how coffee and mead can go together. So that's
you don't.
My mission when I come down.
I love the idea of the coffee mead. I love the flavors working together. I just didn't like the choice of coffee. So I am thrilled. When I saw this, I think it was last week, this release, I was over the moon. You have no idea. And then I was like, I have to get Nitin on the podcast.
You messaged me the second you saw it.
Basically, I was like, I need to find out more about this. This is great. Our collaboration, something that Moonshine is planning to take on more of. And what do you think the collaborations are the future of branding?
I think it's the easiest way for us to stand out of the rather cluttered large MNC brands, right? So MNC brands have their own sort of, unfortunately, they've got balls and chains when it comes to trying to collaborate with other brands. Whereas when you look at smaller, what you folks are at Navilo now, you guys are literally what I've heard a lot in the startup world as insurgent brands, right? You are taking the fight on with the big boys. And I think something that we all have, as in younger brands, smaller brands, homegrown brands, are that we are willing to push the envelope on product and on packaging in ways that even other companies cannot. And this is one great way for us to sort of use our customer base to kind of draw attention to you, and your customer base to sort of pull attention to us, because at the end of the day, the cohort is the same, the consumer segment is the same. And therefore, for us, it's a great way to also, I wouldn't call it qualify, but sort of pat each other on the back when it comes to, I know the kind of ingredients you use, and now here's you kind of almost giving a stamp of approval for the ingredients that we use. So it's a lot of cultural things that work with smaller insurgent brands, as I see. And I think you're going to see a lot more of this coming forward. Within Moonshine, the reason we've named this the collab project and then featuring Subco is because we want to do more of this with as many brands as we can. And this is something that we look forward to going forward, because it keeps us on our toes, because it's not easy to all the time do this. And to get it right. I mean, it's not just, we want to move collab away from, I took your ingredients, I put it into mine, and hey, look at the product. It's got to have a lot more R&D, like this. I mean, the stuff that you picked up very quickly when I said it takes 6 months to create a great product. Right? You can't just say,
Wow,
I want
yeah,
to
for
make
sure.
something and I know you make it, so why don't you send me that product? I'll just blend it in. There needs to be a banter because we don't understand coffee. We don't understand coffee at all the way Subco understands it. We
Of
understand
course,
meat.
of
So
course.
Subco brought that
Yeah.
entire R&D around coffee, and it was their idea saying, try and age it and let's see what happens if you age it in green beans. What if you age roasted beans? And this this whole thing sort of changed the way the product tastes like today. So we need to do more
Yeah.
of this with more brands, and I want more brands doing it with each other. It's great. I mean, it's great as a consumer. If I look at it, this is the best thing I can get. Right? I'm getting two people to put their best foot forward and give me a product that is international standards and quality.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're quite right in saying that the consumers are the ultimate beneficiaries of all of this. And I think it's just a great service that brands can pay to consumers. And instead of thinking about things like USPs and marketing gimmicks, whatever, delivering real value. As you know, as entrepreneurs, when we're pitching both to investors or facing the market, we're always being asked, what value are you creating? Entrepreneurs essentially are value creators by profession. And I just think this is such a fantastic way to bring value to the market. And also, one of the things that I'm sort of reflecting on listening to you speak is that, and also just thinking about some of my experiences with these sorts of things, brands, we have to become better at listening to be able to communicate better if we want to have successful collaborations. It makes us better listeners. In fact, because as you said, you have a core competency around mead, for example, and Subco has a core competency around coffee, and there's a reason why your brands are standing on a certain platform because of skills and knowledge and merit and experience. But then for those worlds to meet, everyone has to be really good at listening, and I know that's quite tough. It's quite easy to get siloed in one's science or one's art form, and it must also probably make us all better at
By the way,
being able
wink,
to
wink,
listen
hint,
to and
hint.
address the
I'm
market.
also asking. I was saying wink. I'm sorry. I quickly jumped to the next most important thing. Wink, wink,
please,
hint, hint. I was about to say Navi Luna Marbeku. We should try and do something that goes beyond just using. That goes beyond just using ingredients, right? I know the background you come with, David. So having you come down, I mean, I can't wait for you to come down to the Meadery once, because and spend some time, like quality time there. So when things get better,
a week.
do come. I mean,
I would absolutely love to come down to the Meadery, spend a week learning and understanding better how mead is made, what the fundamentals are, and then starting to think about like how I could use that in like my own work, but also maybe coming up with something fun. I mean, we've had some cheeky talks on the side. I'm not going to discuss them on the podcast.
But we should do something together for sure.
Know what we're talking about?
Yes, we do. We should do something together for sure.
It would be so nice. And I think it's really interesting. Like I said, I think this is a time for better communication, for better listening, for better understanding, for working together, for building communities. And I know it is challenging because we're also deep in our own thing. I think also people forget, it is so hard running an FMCG startup. You've got branding and you've got manufacturing. Whereas typically those two things have been segregated. It's really hard. So then the time to step out of all of that. So that's why I just have huge respect for you for spending 6 months with Subco to develop a fantastic product. I mean, it looks great. I haven't tasted it yet, but I have no doubt that it's phenomenal. Nitin, what's next for you? What are you excited about?
Production is finally stable. Liquid, something that we are proud of now. It took us a lot of R&D within the space of almost, I think, the first 18 odd months. We were still figuring out the product, trying to find a way to keep it stable for longer times. So all that work is done. And we are now at a space where we can very happily get out. And that's what we're going to do. And turn into a national brand first. And we've also sort of gotten little baby steps into the international market as well. So love to see how that pans out. And if that does well, sort of accelerate that over the next, after the first 6 months. So next year is when we're going to start pushing hard on the international market as well. So two big challenges. At least the next, I think, 36 months are going to be working like crazy and hoping the chips fall in the right places.
Unfortunately, our conversation with Nitin got cut short due to a network error, but I hope that you found this conversation insightful, interesting, and delicious. I look forward to bringing you more conversations with fantastic people in the space of art, food, and drink. But until then, from me, signing off, David Bello from Velocity. Bye-bye.